3 months ago, I was just another waitress at one of the most prestigious restaurants in Chicago. Every night felt the same, serving the city's elite, CEOs, actors, tech moguls, and doing my best to remain invisible. My job was simple: be polite, efficient, and never make a scene. I'd learned to keep my cool even when serving people who spent more on a single meal than I made in a week. Most nights, I didn't even think twice about the extravagant lives these people led. I just did my job and went home. But one evening, everything changed. It was a typical Friday night, bustling with activity as the restaurant filled up with guests. The chatter of fancy conversations and the clinking of fine china created a familiar background hum. I was just finishing up my 5th round of water refills when he walked in. I didn't pay much attention at first until I saw the way people in the restaurant seemed to notice him. Samuel Blackwell. His name rang a bell. Of course, I had heard of him. He was everywhere. Blackwell Industries, his tech empire, was one of the largest in the world. He was a self-made billionaire, one of the wealthiest men in the country, and yet here he was, asking for a private table in the corner of the dining room. That was unusual for someone like him, but I was assigned to serve him anyway. I approached his table, trying to act natural despite my curiosity. I took his drink order, brought him water, and started the usual small talk. But Samuel barely acknowledged me. His eyes were fixed on his phone, clearly absorbed in something important. Then, as I set the water down, I noticed it. A tattoo, barely visible beneath his sleeve. It was intricate, a butterfly, its wings entwined with vines, curling into an infinity symbol. My heart skipped a beat. I'd seen that tattoo before. My mother, Leah, had the same one. Same design, same placement on her left wrist. I'd always wondered about it, but my mom had never fully explained. "It's from a long time ago, before you were born," she'd always say. In that moment, something stirred inside me. I couldn't hold back the question any longer. I leaned in, feeling my pulse quicken, and asked him, "Excuse me, sir, I couldn't help but notice your tattoo. My mother has the same one, the butterfly with the infinity symbol. May I ask what it means?" His reaction was immediate, and it caught me off guard. Samuel stopped mid-sip, his eyes snapping up to meet mine, and for a brief moment, everything around us seemed to freeze. He placed his wineglass down slowly, his hand trembling just slightly. There was a look in his eyes that I couldn't quite read, something between surprise and recognition, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. I stood there, unsure of what to say next, but my mind was racing. I had never expected this reaction. He didn't just brush it off or give a polite smile like I'd anticipated. Instead, his gaze locked onto mine, intense and full of emotion. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice softer than before, almost strained. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "My mother. Her name is Leah. She has that tattoo too. Same one, same design. I've always wondered what it meant." For a moment, Samuel didn't respond. He just stared at me, his face going pale. His eyes widened, as if he'd seen a ghost. I could feel the tension building in the air, the room suddenly feeling smaller. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't look away either. The seconds felt like minutes. "Leah?" he whispered, almost as if to himself. Is she here in Chicago?" I nodded, unable to fully comprehend what was happening. "She's here, yes. She's my mom." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, his eyes never leaving mine. In one swift motion, he knocked over his glass of wine, the red liquid spilling across the table in a dramatic splash. He didn't even seem to notice the mess. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice now tight with something I couldn't name. "I need to leave. Keep the tip, everything. I'll take care of it." And just like that, Samuel turned and walked out, leaving me standing there in stunned silence. The shattered glass, the wine soaking into the white linen tablecloth, everything seemed to blur around me. I was frozen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What did the tattoo mean? What was the connection between him and my mother? And why had he left so suddenly? My head was spinning, but I knew one thing for sure. I needed answers. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened, something that could change everything. As I got home, I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed a message to my mom, my heart pounding. "Mom, do you know someone named Samuel Blackwell?" I hit send, then immediately regretted it. What if she didn't remember? What if it was all some strange coincidence? But I couldn't stop the questions from flooding my mind. I put my phone down and tried to focus on other things, but the image of Samuel's face, his reaction, kept replaying in my mind. He had looked like he knew my mother, like her name had meant something to him, something deep. I couldn't help but feel like I was on the edge of discovering something that had been hidden for years. I waited for what felt like hours, but my mom didn't respond. She was probably asleep, and I knew she had a long day ahead at the nursing home. She had been ill for so long, battling the effects of age and disease, and I didn't want to disturb her. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I did the one thing I had to do. I Googled Samuel Blackwell. His name came up immediately, self-made billionaire, founder of Blackwell Industries. His face stared back at me from every article. I clicked through a few links, reading about his rise to power, the billions he had amassed, and how he had never married, never settled down. But there was one thing that stuck out in nearly every profile: a love lost long ago. I found it odd that there were so few personal details about his life, but I was desperate for any information. His face, gruff and intense, kept appearing in my mind, but it wasn't just his business success that made me uneasy. It was the way he had reacted to my question. The way the mention of my mom's name had completely changed him. It wasn't just recognition. It was something more profound. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. She had finally responded. "Mom, why do you ask about Samuel Blackwell?" I froze. The questions were mounting, but now I needed answers from the only person who could give them to me. I couldn't wait any longer. I grabbed my coat and left the apartment, my mind racing as I made my way to the nursing home. The streets of Chicago were quiet that night, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement from an earlier rain. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I knew something had shifted. The questions swirling in my head were urgent, like they needed to be answered now. When I walked into my mother's room, she was sitting by the window, her frail form bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights outside. She smiled weakly when she saw me, but there was a sadness in her eyes that I'd come to expect over the past few months. Her illness had taken its toll on her, and the once vibrant woman I'd known was now barely holding on. "How are you, Mom?" I asked, sitting down beside her. "Same as usual," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "Not much has changed, sweetheart." I hesitated, unsure of how to ask what had been haunting me all day. I didn't want to upset her, but the need for answers was overwhelming. I had to know. "Mom," I started, my voice shaky, "do you know a man named Samuel Blackwell?" Her reaction was immediate. For just a second, her eyes widened, then her expression softened, and she looked away, as if she were trying to gather her thoughts. She reached up and gently touched her wrist, where I knew the tattoo was. I could see her hesitation, but I couldn't stop now. "Why do you ask about him?" Her voice was steady, but I could hear the subtle shift in it, like she was trying to keep something buried. I took a deep breath and said it. "He was at the restaurant last night, and he had the same tattoo as you, the butterfly, the infinity symbol." I watched her face carefully, waiting for a reaction. Her hand instinctively went to the tattoo on her wrist, her fingers tracing it as if remembering something long past. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I never thought I'd hear that name again. My heart clenched. This wasn't just a coincidence. There was more to this story, more than I could have imagined. And now I needed to know everything. My mother's words hit me like a freight train. I sat there, trying to process what she had just said, but it felt like the world around me had suddenly gone quiet. Samuel, this man I had just served at the restaurant, was someone from my mother's past. But there was more. I could see the way her fingers lingered on her wrist, the tattoo she had never explained, the one she had always dismissed with a vague answer. "Mom," I whispered, "who is he? What happened between you two?" She took a shaky breath, wiping away the tear that had escaped her eye. She seemed to be gathering her strength, like she was about to share something she had buried for years. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, the way her memories were tugging at her, wanting to be freed. "We were in love," she said softly, her voice trembling. "A long time ago, before you were born. Samuel, he was my first love. We were young, and we were happy, but I had to leave. My grandmother was sick, and I promised her I'd come back. When I did, Samuel was gone. I tried to find him, but he had disappeared. There was no way to reach him. No one knew where he went. I thought he'd forgotten about me. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. This man, this stranger who had walked into the restaurant, had been my mother's great love. The one she had never spoken about, the one she had lost. The tattoo, the infinity symbol, had been their connection, a promise that no matter the distance, no matter the time, their love would endure. But it hadn't lasted. "You never told me about him," I said, more to myself than to her, trying to make sense of everything. "I couldn't," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to drag you into a past that was gone. I wanted to protect you from the hurt, from the disappointment. I didn't think I'd ever see him again." She looked at me then, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and sadness. But now, I don't know. After all these years, it feels like fate has brought him back. I could barely wrap my mind around what she was saying. Samuel Blackwell, the billionaire businessman, was my father, my biological father. It was all too much to process in that moment. The world I had known, the story of my life, had just shifted completely. The days that followed were a blur of confusion, questions, and overwhelming emotions. I couldn't stop thinking about what my mother had told me. Samuel Blackwell, this man I had served at the restaurant, wasn't just some stranger. He was my father. The realization hit me in waves, each one leaving me breathless. I had never even considered the possibility, never suspected that my mother had a past so entwined with someone like him. How could I have known? The more I thought about it, the more questions piled up. What had happened between them? Why hadn't she ever told me about him? And why now, after all these years, had Samuel suddenly reappeared? I kept replaying the moment in the restaurant, the way his face had gone pale when I mentioned her name, the way he had practically bolted from the table. There was something in his eyes that made me think he wasn't just surprised. He was deeply affected. That evening, I got a text from him. "Samuel, I need to speak with you. I've been searching for your mother for years. When I heard her name today, I couldn't believe it. Please, can we meet?" I didn't hesitate. I knew this was a moment I couldn't ignore. A part of me was terrified. What if he wasn't who I thought he was? But the other part of me, the part that had been searching for answers my whole life, knew that I couldn't walk away from this. I agreed to meet him the next afternoon at a nearby cafe, my heart racing with anticipation. When I saw him, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked just as he had in the photos, sharp suit, controlled demeanor. But there was a vulnerability in his eyes now, something raw that hadn't been there the night we met. He stood when I walked in, and I could see the weight of years in his posture. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," Samuel said, his voice quiet. "I've been looking for Leah for so long, but I never knew you existed." He paused, almost as if the words were hard to say. "I never knew about you, Lucia." His words hit me harder than I expected. He didn't just regret losing my mother, he regretted never knowing me. And I could see that pain in his face. It was real. "I've missed so much," he added, his voice breaking slightly, "and I need to make things right with both of you." Samuel and I sat across from each other, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. I could feel the tension, the weight of everything he was carrying, everything I was trying to process. My mind was a mess of emotions, confusion, anger, and an odd sense of relief. Part of me wanted to shout, ask why he had stayed away all these years, why he hadn't found my mother sooner. But the other part of me, the part that had always wondered about my father, wanted to know him, to hear the story he had to tell. "I don't even know where to start," Samuel said after a long pause, his eyes on the table. "When I met your mother, I thought I'd found the person I was going to spend my life with. We were young, but it felt like we had all the time in the world. And then life happened." His voice faltered slightly as if the memories were too painful to fully recount. "She had to leave for Italy to take care of her family. I promised her I'd wait. But when she came back, I was gone. I had moved. I thought she'd chosen to stay there. I thought she had moved on." I could see the regret in his eyes, and it broke my heart. He wasn't just some rich businessman who had lived a life of luxury. He was a man who had lost something precious, someone he had loved deeply. "I tried to find her," he continued, his voice growing more urgent. For years, I tried to reach her, but by the time I realized I had made a mistake, she was gone. And then, well, I built this empire. I buried the past because I didn't think I could have both, my career and the woman I loved. But the truth is, I've been empty. I've spent the last 20 years thinking about her, about the life we could have had. His words were raw, and for the first time, I saw the man behind the title, behind the wealth and success. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a man who had made choices, who had lived with the consequences of them. And now, he was sitting here, facing me, his daughter, asking for a chance to make things right. I never knew about you, Lucia, Samuel said softly, his voice breaking. But now that I do, I want to be here for you. I've missed so much already, and I'm not going to waste any more time. Tears filled my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't know whether to be angry or grateful. All I knew was that I had a father now, and he was offering me something I never thought I'd have, a second chance at family. The days that followed our meeting felt like they were moving in slow motion, each moment heavy with the weight of everything Samuel had shared with me. I couldn't stop thinking about what he had said, the way he had looked at me, the pain in his eyes when he talked about my mother, about the years he had spent without her, without me. I had always felt like something was missing in my life, an invisible hole I could never quite place. Now, I understood why. My father had been out there somewhere for all these years, and I never knew. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel. Part of me was angry that he hadn't been there for my mother, for me, angry that he had let time slip away, that we had missed out on so much. But another part of me, a part I wasn't ready to admit yet, was relieved. I wasn't just the daughter of a single mother anymore. I had a father. And despite everything, despite all the hurt, I wanted to know him. I wanted to understand the person behind the name. The next time Samuel and I met, I had questions. So many questions. We sat in a small cafe, and for the first time, I found myself really listening to him. He talked about his life, about how he had thrown himself into building his company after losing touch with my mother. He explained how he never married, never settled down, because no one ever measured up to her. That hurt more than I expected. The idea that my mother had been his one true love, the one he never forgot, felt like something out of a fairy tale. Why didn't you try harder to find her? I asked, my voice trembling. I needed to understand why it had taken him so long to come back into our lives. I should have. I know that, he said, his eyes filled with regret. But at the time, I thought it was too late. I thought she'd moved on. I thought I'd lost her for good. And I didn't know about you. I didn't know about you until that night. His words hung in the air, and I realized something in that moment. It wasn't just that he had missed out on being a part of my life. He had missed out on knowing his daughter, on being a part of something he never even knew existed. And yet here he was, trying to make up for lost time. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice soft and full of sorrow. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. It wasn't easy to forgive him. Not yet, but I wasn't ready to let go of the possibility of something new, something real. Maybe, just maybe, we could start again. As the weeks passed, I started to process everything more clearly. Samuel and I saw each other more frequently, and with each conversation, the bond between us deepened. It wasn't easy to let go of the anger, the years of wondering where he had been, why he hadn't been a part of my life. But with every word he spoke, I saw the sincerity in his eyes, the regret, the longing to make things right. And it wasn't just about him trying to fix the past. It was about us building something now, something real. He told me about the long nights he spent working on his business, his mind always drifting back to my mother. He admitted that he had buried his feelings for her, convincing himself that she had moved on, that she had chosen a different life. But hearing about his regret, his constant search for her, made me realize that I wasn't the only one who had missed out. He had lived with this emptiness too, this what could have been that had haunted him. I started to let my guard down. I began asking him about his life, his dreams, his regrets. Samuel wasn't just the distant, powerful man I had seen from afar. He was a person who had been searching for something he had lost. It became clear to me that he wanted to know me, not just as the daughter he never knew, but as the person I had become. He was determined to be there for me, to make up for the years we had missed. The hardest part, though, was watching him with my mother. Samuel had kept his distance from her for so long, but now that they were finally together again, he was there for her in ways I hadn't expected. He paid for her treatments, made sure she was comfortable, and spent hours talking with her, sharing memories of their past. It was like they were both reclaiming a part of their history, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace watching them together. They had missed out on so much, but now they had the chance to rebuild what they had lost. I had always dreamed of having a family, of knowing what it was like to have both parents around. And now, with Samuel in my life, I felt like that dream was finally coming true. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't the way I imagined it, but it was real. We were finally starting over, and I was willing to let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we could create something beautiful, even after all these years. A few months had passed since Samuel re-entered our lives, and things had started to settle into a new kind of normal. My mother's health remained fragile, but there was a noticeable difference in her spirit. She seemed lighter, more at peace, and I could see the way she looked at Samuel, like she had found something she thought she had lost forever. It wasn't perfect. There were still days when she was too sick to get out of bed, days when the pain of her illness made everything feel overwhelming. But in the midst of it all, there was something beautiful happening. The bond between my parents, fragile as it was growing stronger, and I felt like I was finally starting to fit into this new reality. I had my own moments of doubt, though. Despite everything, there were days when I couldn't fully let go of the hurt. The years spent without Samuel, without knowing him, still stung. I'd never imagined I'd meet my father for the first time as an adult, a stranger who came into my life with so much history and so many regrets. But as I spent more time with him, I began to understand that he wasn't perfect. He had made mistakes, but he was doing everything he could to make up for them now. And somehow, that was enough. One afternoon, as we sat together on the porch of my mother's nursing home, Samuel turned to me, his voice soft and uncertain. "Lucia, I know I can't erase the past. I know I've missed so much, but I want to be here for you, for both of you, for as long as I can. I don't want to waste any more time." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so much of my life feeling like an outsider in my own family, but now, sitting there with him, with my mother quietly smiling beside us, I felt like I was finally starting to belong. For the first time, I wasn't just looking at the past. I was looking forward to the future. "We can start now," I said, my voice trembling a little. "We can build something, even if it's just for the time we have." Samuel nodded, his eyes shining with something I hadn't seen in him before: hope. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had the family I had always longed for. The butterfly tattoo on my mother's wrist, now visible in the fading sunlight, seemed like a symbol of everything we had been through: love, loss, and the hope of new beginnings. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. A few weeks later, life started to feel different. It was as if the weight of all the years that had passed between Samuel and my mother was finally starting to lift. Watching them together was surreal at times. There were still moments of sadness. Of course there were. But there was also laughter, shared memories, and something deeper, more meaningful than I'd ever seen between them. It felt like they were finally reclaiming the love they had lost so long ago, like they were making up for all the missed years. And in a way, that healing extended to me, too. Samuel and I had grown closer, though there were still things we both needed to work through. I had so many questions, so many things I needed to understand. But with each conversation, I felt more and more like I was beginning to understand him. He wasn't just the powerful billionaire. He was a man who had lived with the regret of lost time, a man who wanted to fix what he could. He'd never married, never had a family, because he hadn't been able to move past my mother. And now, seeing them together again, seeing the way he cared for her, I realized just how much he had suffered in silence all these years. One evening, after my mother had gone to bed, Samuel and I sat on the porch of their house in Michigan. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. It was one of those quiet moments where everything seemed still, as if time had slowed down just for us. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "I never thought this day would come," he said softly, his voice tinged with emotion. "I never thought I'd get the chance to be here for you, for your mother. I've wasted so much time, but I want to make the most of what we have left." I didn't know how to respond. A part of me wanted to say that it was okay, that we had all moved on, but another part of me felt the weight of his words. I wasn't angry anymore. I had let go of the resentment, the confusion. I had a father now, and I had a family that, despite everything, was finally coming together. "We have time now," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "And that's enough. Let's make the most of it." Samuel nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, and for the first time, I believed it. We had time. Time to rebuild, to heal, and to cherish the moments that had once seemed lost forever. The weeks following that quiet evening on the porch passed by in a blur, but something had shifted inside me. The uncertainty and distance that had once defined my relationship with Samuel were gradually replaced with understanding and a sense of closeness I hadn't known I needed. We started doing things together, simple things. Samuel would take me out to lunch, just the two of us. No business talk, no distractions, just the chance to get to know each other. We'd talk about my childhood, about the way my mother had raised me, and Samuel would share little pieces of his own life, the things he had never told anyone. It felt like we were building something new, like the years of silence were slowly being filled with words and shared moments. With my mother's health still fragile, we made the most of every day. I started to see her differently, too. She was no longer just the woman who had raised me. She was also the woman who had loved and lost, who had carried her own regrets, her own dreams unspoken for so long. There was a tenderness between her and Samuel now, a kind of quiet understanding. They didn't need to explain everything. There was comfort in simply being together, in knowing that they had found each other again, even if it was later than either of them had hoped. One afternoon, Samuel and I were sitting in the living room, a comfortable silence between us as we watched my mother rest. He looked over at me, his eyes filled with a kind of vulnerability that he rarely showed. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I never thought I'd get a second chance. I thought the past was gone, buried, but here we are, and I'm not going to waste it." I could feel the sincerity in his words. And as I looked at him, at the man who had once been a stranger, I realized how much I had grown to care for him. Not as the distant figure I'd imagined, but as a father. There was still a long way to go, still so much to understand, but for the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone. The family I had longed for, the one I had missed, was finally coming together. "I'm glad we found each other," I said quietly, meeting his gaze. "I really am." And in that moment, I knew we were on the path to something new, something real. It had been 6 months since Samuel had come back into our lives, and while everything wasn't perfect, there was a quiet peace in the way things had settled. My mother's health had stabilized, and though the future remained uncertain, we found comfort in the time we had together. Watching Samuel and my mother, seeing them laugh and talk like they'd never been apart, made me realize how much they had both suffered all those years. But now, they had each other again, and in some small way, that was enough. It was enough for me too. I spent a lot of time with Samuel in those months, and each day, I felt more connected to him. He'd never been the father I had imagined, someone who would show up at my birthday parties or give me life advice when I was growing up, but that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the man he was now, the man who was trying to make up for lost time, the man who had realized that family wasn't just about blood, but about the moments you chose to invest in. I watched him change as he grew closer to my mother and me. He wasn't the same billionaire businessman I had met in the restaurant months ago. He was becoming my father. One afternoon, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sunset over the lake behind my mom's house, Samuel turned to me, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the fading light. "I've thought a lot about the past," he said, his voice quiet. "About everything I missed, about the mistakes I made. I know I can't undo it all, but I need you to know. I'm here now, for you, for your mother, and I'll make sure you don't miss anything else." I looked at him, my heart swelling with emotions I hadn't expected to feel. "We've still got time," I said softly, my voice trembling with the truth of it. And that's what matters now. We have time to rebuild. And as I sat there with him, with my mother inside resting peacefully, I knew I wasn't just rebuilding the past, I was creating a new future. One where we had a second chance to be the family we had always deserved. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had found a place where I belonged, and the feeling was more than enough. It was a few weeks after that quiet conversation with Samuel on the porch that everything truly started to feel like it was falling into place. The uncertainty and the fears that had plagued me for so long began to fade, replaced with something solid, something real. Samuel was more than just a man who had reappeared after years of absence. He was my father, the one who, despite his mistakes and regrets, was making the effort to be part of my life, to be there for both my mother and me. We spent more time together, slowly building a relationship. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes I would catch myself expecting him to be the father I had imagined as a child, the one who would show up at every milestone, always present and supportive. But I had to remind myself that this was different. This wasn't about trying to recreate the past. It was about forging something new, something we could build together from the ground up. And as hard as it was to let go of the idealized version of family I had once dreamed of, I knew this was real. Samuel was still learning how to be a father. He had missed so much, and I could see how much he wanted to make up for it. It was the little things. How he'd take me out for coffee and listen when I talked about my life. How he'd sit with my mother in her room, holding her hand as they reminisced about their past. And every day, I felt like I was starting to forgive him, not because I had to, but because he was showing me that he was worth forgiving. One afternoon, Samuel and I went for a walk by the lake, the sun beginning to set behind us. It was one of those perfect, quiet moments that felt too good to be true. Samuel turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "I know I can't change the past," he said, his voice low, "but I'm grateful for every moment I have with you now, and I'll keep doing everything I can to make up for the time I lost." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't expected. "We have time now," I replied, my voice steady. "That's all that matters." And in that moment, I realized that while the past had shaped us, it didn't define us. We had the future in front of us, and that was more than enough. We had a chance to write our own story, together. Life doesn't always go as planned, and sometimes we lose precious time due to misunderstandings, regrets, or missed opportunities. But it's never too late to start over. Embrace the moments you have now and focus on building meaningful connections, whether it's with family, friends, or even yourself. Don't let the past hold you back. Use it as a lesson, not a burden. Be patient with those around you, and most importantly, be kind to yourself. The future is shaped by the choices we make today, and with time, second chances, and genuine effort, healing and growth are possible.